Well, hello, everyone. This is Frank Christian. I am leading a discussion on the ways of the alongsider, and this is basically a summary of the first lesson that we had with what's going on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a, a file here, the PowerPoint program, and we're going to start it from the beginning. We'll just walk through this through. So this is for folks who have been unable to meet the meeting. This is lesson one. And so what we're doing is we're recording it. We're going to try it at 6 o'clock California time on Thursdays, but not very many people have been there. But I think it's probably prudent to have something laid aside so that it's ready for you to use, that you can use. Now, what you'd want to do is you want to get the book, and you can see it here, The Ways of the Alongsider. We can get it through Nav Press. We have copies at the Desert Springs Church in Palm Desert. If you need others, you can contact me. I can order things through Tyndall. In terms of getting it to you overseas, I haven't been able to figure that out, but anything that's in the United States shouldn't be too hard to get for you. So having said that, let's go on. The first way we want to kind of recap how we're going to do what we're doing is this first lesson is talking about the ways of the amateur. Next week, the next session, and we already have that, is alongsiders live out the great commandment, which is to love God. The third session is the idea of intentionality, that we think big, but we start small. The idea is you do it intentionally. And then the next week will be the way of prayer. Alongsiders partner with God through prayer, and that'll set us up for the second basic division of this thing. The first division is foundations. The second is skills. So having said that, let's go ahead and remember Matthew 28:19 and 20. Making disciples is what we're concerned of. Baptizing in the name of the Father, teaching them to obey everything Jesus has commanded us, and Jesus is with us. So having said that, a couple questions we asked at first is, well, why did you choose to join this group? And second, what did you hope to gain by this experience? And I would modify that slightly for you. Why are you doing this? And what do you hope to gain by it? And I would say, more importantly, there should be somebody else with you as we're doing this. We can do this kind of solo, and if you need to get a hold of me, I can be reached through the church. But we can work that through. Now, basically, how can you use this thing? Well, the idea is that this is a book to experience, not necessarily to explore. This is not just a textbook. It is designed for small group. It can be done on one-on-one, and it can also be a curriculum in the classroom. It starts with the idea of a telescopic view. We want to look at the 20,000 foot level or the 30,000 foot level. But we also come along with toolboxes on each of these lessons. So there are things that you can work with, what's going on. You start with the 20,000 foot point of view, which is what is God trying to do? What's trying to happen? And then we work it down to, well, how does that relate to me? And what do I need to do? So the basic illustration that I think will help make more sense of what we're trying to do is it starts out with a bullseye. The bullseye is making disciples. Recruiting people as learners, as I like to think of it, having them come alongside Jesus and walk more closely. Now, how we do that is we start out with our first thing is our relationship with God. And then we have to have relationship with others. So we start out with a relationship, then we have the 2D, which is discovery and discussion around the Bible. And that's a large part of what you're going to be doing after you get, even when you get done with what's in this book, as you're dealing with people, you're continuing to disciple, you really can sit down with a cup of coffee and the Bible, and be able to talk to people. The other thing that's a little different about this than other things is we have the 3A, which is application. We cannot ask anybody to do anything. If we're not a disciple ourselves, we can't make one. Okay. We're not asking people to do what we don't do. The second thing is we actually want accountability. And by accountability, I mean, actually having something there to make sure I get it done, because this is going to be functioning with intentionality. You really need somebody else there with you. And then the third point is we're going to ask you to do some things in this whole course, of this whole program, that are going to seem a little strange, and you might make some mistakes doing it. That's okay. Mistakes are normal. That is not the end of the world. So that's kind of where we want to look at this whole thing. And there's a lot of different approaches for a lot of different people. And I think that's how God intended it to be. So we want you to be able to do that. But we do know that we need each other to do that. Okay. So I want to ask you some discussion questions here. Like, how do you feel about the concept of a ministry amateur? The book talks about the fact that it's aimed at amateurs, which means it's really aimed at you. It's aimed at not the professionals, but the amateurs. And then what are you thinking of in your mind when you think about making disciples? What does that actually look like? How would that feel about you? And then the third thing you need to start saying is, boy, I'm going to have to relate to somebody else. Well, how do I really feel about that? What's going on with me in the real world about me really doing that? And the idea is I want you to be able to talk to the Lord about that and to talk to each other about that, because you can't make disciples if you're not in contact with other people. One way or the other, you're going to have to step out. We had a little illustration, I think, that talks about it too. There's an intimidation factor in this whole thing, in that, boy, I don't know what's going to happen. How is it going to go? What's going to happen if I'm going to mess it up? And if you remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the movie, which probably dates me seriously, where Paul Newman looks over at Robert Redford and they're getting ready to jump off the cliff because the Pinkertons are coming after them into the pond. And Robert Redford is hesitant, and he's saying, well, I can't swim. Paul looks over to him and says, well, can't swim. The fall will probably kill you. Now, a little sardonic humor there, but the idea being we are going to jump out on this, and we're not going to leave each other alone in this thing too. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to deal with fears. I get to minister up in the Marine Corps base, and they tell me that the way Marines are trained is that when it comes to fears, you embrace them, you go after them. So I hope you can do that. And then the other question I want to ask you is, what's that going to do with your church? This thing could have some very significant influences, and we'll be talking about that more later on as we go on. Now, there is an assessment on pages 8 and 9 of the book, and that's really get a feel for how you evaluate yourself, how you see yourself in terms of how you do, where you are in this whole, quote, disciple making process. Use it as a tool. Use it as something to look at what's going on. Discover some strengths, discover some high scores. It's really pretty simple. You can look at it, you look at the questions, you rate it 1 to 5, five being, high, best, 1 being the lowest. And I think what you'll discover is that you can see some things that you already know. You probably know more about making disciples than you think you do, okay? And then you'll see some areas of growth. Again, the idea being, well, let's see what's going on here. This is part of our adventure with God, okay? And this is part of what I think God is doing in terms of building his kingdom. So we're jumping into it. Now, as you look at this study, as you look at the principles of the way of the amateur, as you look at the principles and the pictures of how this stuff's going on, really try to take the time to say, is there something I really want to remember from this thing? If I were going to pick one, what would be one thing that I'd really want to see myself doing from this thing? And then I want you to picture yourself in the real world applying this principle during the coming week. How would you do that? What would it look like for you to do what you see as a principle here? I'm also saying to you that we have action pages on this thing, and we want you to record some of those results on that action page so that you can relate to somebody else, which is where I think is really important as we continue on with this thing. A couple thoughts that you need to have. You really should have someone else doing this with you. Now, If we have to do it online, we can do this on Zoom, but we really do meet on Thursdays at the church. And maybe the answer is we need to do something else later. But you really need someone else to be able to show this stuff too. And you need to be intentional as we're looking at it. You know, we need to have a vision, we need to have intentions, and we need to have methods. Now, you're only going to get out of the study what you put into it. We ask each of you to complete the chapters and look up the verses, and we want you to answer the reflection questions before attending the session. Now, what that means is you're going to have to probably schedule a time and a place to do it, because if you don't schedule it, chances are all you're doing is wait until you feel motivated to do it. Usually what happens is about an hour before the study, you suddenly realize I haven't done it, and then you're frantically putting stuff together. Let's have somebody else support us in this so we don't get into that, because it has been really, really rich having discussions within the tables of the various groups that are doing this. Okay, and I think that's basically the heart of this lesson. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop